Grammar Lesson 3.4, Present Tense of the verbs tener and venir. So far in Spanish, you've learned a lot of verbs. All of these verbs have ended with either AR, ER, or IR. The next couple of verbs we're going to learn about are ER, one is an ER verb and one is an IR verb. So really quickly, let's review your regular pattern endings for those verbs. Hopefully these all look familiar to you. If there are any here that you're not familiar with, then make sure and jot these down in your notes. I've highlighted the nosotros and vosotros forms of these, or endings for ER and IR verbs, because that's the only difference between these two types of verbs. Okay, so far all of the verbs that you've learned have followed regular patterns when you're doing your conjugation. Today we're going to start diving into some of those verbs that kind of have their own special rules. The two verbs we're going to focus on today are tener, which means to have, and venir, which means to come. These are both very common verbs in the Spanish language and very important for you to know and be familiar with. Now, as you write down the conjugations in your notes, you can choose if you want to include the subject pronouns like the chart on the left, or if you feel like you know those well enough, you can just put 6 boxes or 6 lines like the chart on the right. That's fine. It's a personal preference and whatever you think is going to help you learn and memorize these verb conjugations best. We're going to skip around just a little bit because first I want to show you the nosotros and vosotros forms of these verbs. They follow the same pattern as any other ER or IR verb. So since tener is an ER verb, your nosotros form is tenemos. Venir, however, is an IR verb, so that form is venimos. The vosotros form for tener is tenéis, whereas the vosotros form for venir is venís. These follow the same pattern as all the other ER and IR verbs that you've been working on. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. The yo form for these verbs is irregular, and where you typically would have just an O, on these verbs you're going to have a GO. So the yo form is yo tengo or yo vengo. Okay? Now the next thing, you'll notice the title at the top of this slide says stem changing verbs with an irregular yo form. Well, so far I've showed you what that irregular yo form is, but now let's talk about what it means to be a stem changing verb. Take the verb tener, for example, T-E-N-E-R. You know that to conjugate a verb, you take that ending off, the ER. Well, when you take that ending off or change it, what you're left with is the stem of the verb, in this case, ten. Well, sometimes verbs have a little bit of a change in that stem, and those are called stem changing verbs. So here's how that works. Where you typically have that E in the stem of the verb tener, you're going to replace that E with an IE. And you're going to do the same with venir. So your other forms will look like this. Tienes, vienes for the to form. El, ella, usted form would be tiene, viene. The ellos, ellas, ustedes forms would be tienen and vienen. See how that works? It's really not too, it's fairly simple. You just have to remember that some verbs have this change, and these are called E to IE verbs. And that's why you see that I have an E to IE in parentheses under each of the verbs in the conjugation charts. There are a few common expressions that we use with the verb tener. Now you'll remember the verb tener means to have, but in these expressions, it's almost like we're expressing to be, and these are a little bit different than ser and estar, and I'll kind of get into why here in just a minute, but I want to go ahead and go through the expressions so you can add them to your notes. If you want to say that someone is 15 years old, you use the expression tener 15 años, which you're literally saying instead of that person is 15 years old, what you're literally saying is that person has 15 years. Tener calor, to have heat, is how you would express that someone is hot temperature-wise. Tener frío, to have coldness, is what you would use to express that someone is cold. Tener cuidado means to be careful. Literally, the meaning is to have care. Tener hambre is the expression we use when someone is hungry. Tener miedo is the expression we use when someone is afraid. Tener prisa is the expression used to express that someone is in a hurry. Tener razón literally means to have reason, but this is how we would typically say that someone is right. Or if they're wrong, we would say no tener razón, to not have reason. Tener sed is the expression we use when someone is thirsty. Tener sueño means that someone is sleepy. Tener suerte means that someone is lucky. So literally that person has luck. Now something I want to point out to you, if you look at all of the words that are highlighted in pink right now, those are not adjectives. Those are nouns, and this is what makes tener different than ser and estar. You guys know the phrase estar frío, to be cold, when you're talking about an object, like the food is cold or the room is cold. Well, when you're talking about people having these nouns, they function a little bit different than the adjectives you used with ser and estar. So make sure you write these notes down so you remember that they function differently. So like I just said, these are nouns, not adjectives. That means instead of saying muy to express that someone is very hungry or very thirsty, we use the words mucho or mucha, because what we're literally saying, if I want to say that I'm very hungry, I'm literally going to say I have a lot of hunger or I have much hunger. So the phrase would be yo tengo mucho hambre. If you were to say yo tengo muy hambre, people would probably know what you're trying to say, but it would be grammatically incorrect. Another thing to keep in mind is that you don't change the ending of these nouns to match the number or gender of the person that you're talking about. So while we is plural, if I want to say that we are sleepy, I would say tenemos sueño. I don't change the word sueño to sueños, even though nosotros is plural. So this is something that sometimes people get a little bit hung up on, but just if you can really get it in your head that these are nouns, not adjectives, then hopefully that will help you remember that you don't need to change that ending to match. Okay, there are a couple of formulas that we also use with the verb tener. We use the verb tener with the word que, Q-U-E, and an infinitive verb to express that someone has to do something. For example, yo tengo que estudiar. I have to study. Or ella tiene que leer. She has to read. Another formula we use is tener plus ganas de plus an infinitive verb to express that someone feels like doing something. Examples: nosotros tenemos ganas de bailar. We feel like dancing. Ellos no tienen ganas de comer. They don't feel like eating. You just have to put that word no in front of the verb tener to express that someone doesn't have to do something or doesn't feel like doing something. Similar to how you would put the word no in front of any other conjugated verb to express that something is not happening. Okay, that's all for your notes. You should have a couple of practice exercises at the bottom of your notes handout, so I'd like you to complete those at this time and have those ready to go over in class.